Welcome to Uncommons. I'm Nate Erskine-Smith, and on this episode, I'm joined by former Conservative Cabinet Minister Lisa Raitt. But before we get to Lisa, a quick public service announcement, because I encourage you to check out our more regular video updates. We call it Uncommons Weekly, and it's the week that was in Parliament. You can watch the videos on our social media, or you can listen to the audio where you get your podcast. The idea is really to complement the new videos alongside this long-standing format of deeper dive conversations with parliamentarians and experts in their respective fields. And today, I am lucky to be joined by Lisa Raitt, former Conservative MP for Milton and former Cabinet Minister. She was actually put into the Harper Cabinet immediately upon being elected, serving in the portfolios of natural resources, then labor, and ultimately transport. And she's led an interesting career post-politics. She works in investment banking for CIBC on the one hand, but more interesting to me, she also co-chairs two organizations focused on public policy and working across party lines. She co-chairs the Task Force on Housing and Climate with Don Iveson. Other members include Mark Carney, Mike Moffat, Jennifer Keesmaat. And she co-chairs the Coalition for a Better Future alongside former Liberal Cabinet Minister Anne McClellan, focused on economic prosperity and productivity. In both cases, working with others who have different ideologies and perspectives to find some common ground on big challenges that our country faces. I asked Adam Van Couverden if there's anything I should know about Lisa before this podcast, because they were opponents in the 2019 election, and he had nothing but positive things to say about her commitment to Milton and her approach to politics, a real testament to Lisa's character. An even bigger testament to that character, though, is her commitment to her family. Her husband, Bruce, suffers from the absolutely terrible disease of early onset Alzheimer's, and she's spoken up to raise awareness both for patients and also for caregivers. In fact, before we start rolling with this conversation, here's a clip of Lisa in the House where she speaks to that devastating challenge.
So today, Mr. Speaker, in recognition of World Alzheimer's Day, I want to pay tribute to the caregivers, to the service providers, to the advocates in each and every province and territory across this great country, whose work it is to lessen the burden of those who have this disease. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Lisa, thanks so much for joining me.
It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Nate.
We actually got a chance to work directly together as much as I wish we had. I think we were at one point co-judges on a basic income debate where it was
Hugh
Siegel, and I forget who he was debating. He was debating a former finance minister from Saskatchewan or something like that.
That's right. She was. But, we were on a committee together.
Yeah, but not for a long time,
No,
we didn't get to travel together.
The Lavalin thing.
Yeah, but I think they only brought you in as a heavyweight. You know what I mean? At that point, you were the ringer. You came in. I was like a regular on that committee, and they just brought you in to bang heads.
Yeah, I think so. I was at a point. It's interesting, though. I will tell you the truth. That was in 2018, 19? Yeah, I think so.
Around there, yeah.
So my husband, Bruce, had been diagnosed in 2016 with Alzheimer's. By the time we got to 2018, he couldn't be left alone anymore. So I went to Andrew Scheer and I said, I'm gonna quit. I can't do this anymore, much like many Alzheimer's families. And he said, He sat down with me and he said, tell me what you need to make this work. This was before the hybrid days. And I said, if I can come in on a Tuesday morning, do all the committee that I need to do, and then leave on a Wednesday. And if I can take Bruce with me, and if I can get my staff to be in the room with me when I have him, if I can take him to places, we can get this done. And he said, absolutely. And he did. And that's how we modified my work. Couldn't do that at home in the riding, so I missed a lot of riding events, ... I was unelected in 2019. But I don't blame it on that. I just couldn't put the work in. As you know, that is really needed in order to keep your profile up in your riding.
Yeah, and it is required. I remember Scott Brayson told me when I was first elected, you're going to get lots done in Ottawa, but don't get lost in Ottawa. You got to make sure you look after your riding. And a lot of people I've watched over, you did it longer than me, I think, but I've watched over now the 9 years of doing this, and some people do get lost in Ottawa.
Yeah, you do. It's different priorities. For me, I would sit home on a Saturday night and I would say, do I want to go to the 3 openings of whatever is happening that day in the riding, or do I want to spend one of the last Saturdays I have with my husband who is Corpus Mentis? And it's an easy decision.
Yes.
Right? I did lose. I don't blame Miltonians on it, but that's just
And it's
My
also why I'm
choice.
not running again. Yeah, I was going to ask you about this later on, but I'm not running, and all politicians will say, "Oh, for family reasons." But I got an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. I coached baseball over the summer. Everyone's told me who's lived a full life, you don't get these years back, and I know that they're right. And so I'll come back to politics at some point, but I need a break to spend time with people I love.
It's all good. I think and plus, listen, you're at 9 years. That's when you start going, the first 7 years, 8 years, it's a lot of fun, right? But then you get to a point where other things matter just a little bit more. And I think that's an okay thing. I think it's a time thing. I'm sure there are people, Nate, who are in their 3rd year and have kids who still feel that they're balancing okay. And that's awesome. There is a wearing down of just how much fun you can have in Ottawa. I use air quotes when I say fun. And you wanna try something different. It's a job. If you're doing the job right, you should be tired after 10 years. You should be. You should be wanting to leave.
Although I'm in this interesting space where if you talk to me in year 3, I would have been quite combative with my own party at times. And I've now, it's not that they leave me a full point, but I can kind of do what I like now. I've I'm not the ringer that they call on to do the panel per se to give the government talking points, because I won't do that. But I'll go into committee if they need someone who's competent and capable to deal with a tough thing. I will, working closely with colleagues on community housing issues. Like I do get a lot out of it. You're gonna miss it a lot when I'm not doing it. Do you miss?
Yeah.
Do you miss?
I miss the collegiality.
Yeah.
I miss the input into public policy, and that's probably why you see me lurking on the edges of public policy. I miss that. I miss that part. You know what? Listen, I sat in question period as a minister and as an opposition. It was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun on both sides. Like, it's a little bit of how do I put it? It's a bit of an adrenaline rush. You don't know what you're going to get between 2:15 and 3:15. Sometimes it's frustrating. Sometimes it's infuriating, but it's a different piece of your life. You don't get that hit of dopamine working in a bank.
Although I will say as a result of not being a cabinet minister, I'd be a great opposition member, but as a result of not being an opposition member, I have not had that question period experience in quite the same way.
Yeah.
The experience the closest to is like when I will, go toe to toe with folks at committee, and that's I feel like a lawyer again, and you have to go back and forth. Can you you mentioned lurking, and so that's a very self-deprecating way of putting it, because it's you are co-chairs of 2 different task forces, one on productivity and one on housing and climate, with serious people, Anne McLellan on one, Don Iveson and others on both fronts. So walk me through that continued engagement in public policy and how you got involved in these organizations and what you're still lurking for.
So lurking, it means unwanted interloper in my mind. And I think sometimes politicians out there are going, for frig's sake, what is she doing back here again? Didn't we get rid of her? Like, why is she still talking and talking? But I'll get to that. So when I left politics, when I was emancipated, we'll say nicely, I knew that I was still going to be involved with some kind of public policy thing. So the first boards that I was asked to sit on, voluntary boards, I accepted. So I'm on the Public Policy Forum. I'm on a community foundation of Halton North, not just Halton North. And I sit on the Care Canada board. So 3 scratches I wanted to itch. I wanted to make sure I was still involved in the big public policy pieces that we do at the forum, like energy and transition, AI, workplace of the future. I like that stuff. And I like at least having access to what the really learned teachings of our experts out there. So that was a no-brainer. The care one is because I still wanted to make sure that I could help girls around the world. And that's kind of what Care Canada does as a charity. Also, these NGOs are an important part of our foreign policy. Their delivery of what we want to do, both in international development, sometimes in security, and oftentimes helping GAC or the government get into areas where they can't possibly get there themselves. So that was an extension. And then the last one is the local one, Community Foundation of Halton, helping charities locally be able to cope with economic issues. So those are the things. Then along came Goldie Hyder and Anne McClellan, and they said, "Hey, Lisa, we have an idea, and it's got to be cross-partisan, so we need you." And I said, "Okay, well, I'll work with Anne," because I worked with her on something called deliberative democracy just 6 months prior. We got along well. Never worked with her before, by the way. We missed each other in Parliament, 2 ships in the night, passing. But we've got lots in common, it would appear now. So we do Coalition for a Better Future, 4 years in, doing measuring of how Canada is doing versus 21 key performance indicators comparing to the rest of the world. Just kind of letting people know, here we are, state of play, and urging politicians like your wonderful self, Nate, to make sure that we're thinking long-term economic growth, not just short-term gains through minority parliaments. So that's the thesis there. And then I got approached
before you get to housing and climate and the second big task force that you're involved in, because I know there's a lot of action on that file. Productivity is a tough thing in politics sometimes because, one, you mentioned long-term decision making. I mean, business leaders face this too. It's like short-term shareholder interest versus long-term sustainability of the company. In politics, we have short-term election cycles, despite the need to look after the long-term national interest. And so there are these conflicting tensions. And how do you, when you look at the picture right now in Canada, and, you know, obviously Poilievre paints this doom, gloom, Canada's broken, and you go down the rabbit hole. And I was making fun of him last week for describing the carbon tax as causing nuclear winter. But regardless, you don't have to comment on all that. That's one picture. Then you've got Freeland presents a picture which is accurate at a macro level to a large degree in terms of, you know, relative success with a soft landing so far, at least, you know, knock on wood. Interest rates coming down, thankfully. Bank of Canada set to cut them a number of times, hopefully, over the course of the coming year. But productivity itself, like per capita growth, is challenged. And so, what's the if you were talking to Christia right now, what's the advice?
Well, here's the good news. We talked to what I like about our current political situation is that we do get calls from various ministers. We also get calls from various oppositions, and we get it from premiers and leaders of opposition across the country because they can see that we're cross-partisan. We have representation from unionization within our group as well. So you try to balance it, but we're not giving prescriptive solutions. We're just telling you where you are right now based upon a whole bunch of factors. And listen, you and I both know that politicians will pick the metric that puts them in the best light, right? So various finance ministers, yours and mine, will pick a metric that makes them look really good. And then the next finance minister, could be the same party, by the way, gets rid of that and says, no, what we really need to measure is X. So what Anne and I do is we measure the same things every year, and we'll do it till 2030. And we'll see how Canada's doing. So the advice that I give to the ministers is always the same. We have an issue with GDP per capita. It is causing people to feel poorer than you would think they are on paper. And we're falling behind the United States, Australia, and the UK. And those are important things because competitiveness is important. So we focus in on 2 things that we believe that we are behind on, according to the KPIs, that could be improved and that could lead to a better solution. And these are, you mentioned it, productivity. So we focus not on how much people are working, we focus on what investments are being made by corporate Canada, quite frankly, because you not only have to have, look, we've got the talent pool, no question. We've got overeducated, in some cases, Canadians out there doing lower paying wage jobs and thinking they're knocking it out of the park. But they don't have the technology to progress them through the next piece. And everybody in this country is risk averse. Yeah. Without a question. And the growth is showing as a result. So what I would say to them is help companies make those riskier decisions of putting in the investment needed in R&D, in technology, whatever. And then on the other hand, governments, I'm not saying lighten the regulatory load, but be a lot more prescriptive in how long it takes for processes to go through. And then you get more certainty. So my sense is companies will be happy to invest if they know that it's not about government subsidies. It's about government certainty and if they can compete. And it's a long
How much do you think
haul.
is the fact we are a country of oligopolies? I just ranted about this the other day. But
Okay.
when
You're getting me in trouble. I have lots of clients who are oligopolies.
we looked at this
There's a really
at the
good
industry
book coming
committee.
out.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. I'll look for the book. But the industry committee before the pandemic, we were, or maybe through the pandemic, we were dealing with this. And you mentioned business investment, research and development. And when you look at, obviously there's government spending that can drive growth, and the U.S. is obviously driving growth through their government spending in an outsized way versus us. Okay, so that's when you compare us versus the U.S., it's hard to compete in that front because we've got to balance our books in a more serious way.
Exactly.
And have an eye to
I'm
that.
not saying that.
Having said that, on the corporate Canada investments, which you're right to point to, that's incredibly lackluster in comparison to the United States. And so, how there are many ways you could potentially drive that. I mean, more competition and addressing the very comfortable oligopolies that don't want to make those investments because they don't need to make those investments.
Yeah, but let's take a look at the recent CRTC decision, which is not going to have the impact that you think. I mean, one would notionally think that prices to consumers are going to go down as a result of the decision, which is to allow other parties to utilize the legacy people who have built the infrastructure for the cellular model, to allow them to use it at a regulated rate, but to allow them to use it anyway. So why would a company continue to invest billions and billions and billions so that other parties are going to benefit from them if you don't believe that the regulated price is going to be fair because the government is setting the price, right? So I think that decision is going to have an even worse impact on decisions made by the various telcos to invest in their capital infrastructure, which it may seem to lower prices in the short term. Again, short-term thinking. It'll lower prices in the short term and all politicians will be happy. But in the long term, we will have an infrastructure deficit in our area of telecommunications, which will be detrimental to our ability to compete with other countries where you see massive build out. And the competition part is tough because then the specter of foreign ownership pops its head up. And then we have to deal with that. Do you want Verizon to own Bell Canada?
I mean, I'm not opposed
Tough
to it.
questions.
I may be more conservative on this. I don't know. I don't want foreign ownership of the media, which we have, but I do. But I'm okay with foreign ownership of airlines, for example. I do think now, obviously, you have to take and we dealt with it at the industry committee too. You got to take a clear-eyed view of national security interests and making sure that we're not going to have ownership that can be weaponized as against us in any kind of conflict.
Right.
But once you clear that hurdle, I think a lot of competition will be welcome in some of these spaces. We have competition in the media, so that's the one that I'm most concerned. Yeah. But I don't know. I'm gonna probably push back a little bit on the telecommunication side, simply because I know in other countries they do have proper structural separation where there's a business interest to build and then they lease, and it's not all about this integrated. We build, we operate, and we solely own the network and get out of here. And because then you do get this duplicative infrastructure investment, where it's massively costly and ultimately costly to consumers. Yeah. Okay, and then the second piece that because when you talk about productivity, I think I've seen you in the media talk about this, where your key metrics don't include housing per se, but housing is wrapped into the productivity conversation, because this was my pitch on the road last year when I was losing leadership. But housing is all about fairness, for sure, and we talk about fairness all the time in politics. But it's actually about productivity, because young people can't afford to live in our communities and our country, and if they can't afford to live here, we're not going to attract people, but we're not going to retain the talent that we need to retain. And we're going to wake up 10 years from now and we're going to be a less talented, less productive country as a result.
100%. And from a very personal point of view, I know your kids are younger than mine. Mine are 23 and 20. They're looking at the States because on TikTok, They see these beautiful homes for $250,000 and they're thinking, I'm never going to be able to afford anything in Toronto. And I want to live near a big city. You can live near a big city and still pay $300,000 for a house. You're not in the city, but you're near it and you're commuting. And it's very, very attractive. And perhaps everyone's eyes are a bit wide open. So what happens in that case? That's when your discussions become very, very different in the country. And we start entertaining things like, well, maybe foreign ownership isn't terrible. 20 years ago, that would have been like touching the third rail. The argument would have been so fierce. But now it's a little bit different because the world has changed. Going back to housing, somewhat the same vein on productivity. Mike Moffat, Dr. Mike Moffat, who is Smart Prosperity, who is also the guy who held the pen on the task force that I sat on, he says that, we are building houses the way we built houses in the 50s and that we haven't really changed how we do it. Perhaps we look at manufacturing, perhaps we look at panelization, perhaps we think about it in a different way, where you build factory houses instead of going on site and doing it in the old ways you do and get some productivity out of that. And I don't disagree. I don't disagree at all. I think that is a smart way to look at it. So I agree with you. The housing construction world still suffers from doing things the old way. And maybe, you can take a look at how to do things the new way.
I like housing as an issue, not only because it is such a serious challenge that we need to confront across levels of government. So it requires that level of cooperation across orders of government, but also there's no real partisan politics in it, where there's no ideological dispute here per se. It's who's going to come up with the best plan to deliver for people. Pierre Poilievre's got his 4 points. It's axe the tax, build the home, stop the crime, fix the budget. I probably got that in the wrong order, but I disagree.
No, you nailed it better than me.
I disagree on axing the tax, obviously, but build the homes. Let's go build the homes. And then it's just like stack up our plan as against each other and who's got the best plan.
True. But listen, to have those discussions is not without friction. And the task force I was on had conservatives, liberals, NDPs, nonpartisans. We had everything. We had academics, we had developers. There are some heated discussions, I have to say, about what is right, what's correct. We did get to 144 recommendations we agreed upon, so it is possible. How many of them are electable is a great question. That's the communications part.
I'm curious about this. So two questions on that. What were the big pain points?
For me,
in terms of like finding consensus.
I can tell you exactly what it was.
Yeah.
No. I mean, a red line for me was if any recommendation considered limiting the choice of fuel that you could use to heat your home as a result of building codes, then I wasn't interested in that. That was a red line for me. So banning natural gas in new builds was not a recommendation that would sit comfortably with me, because although it's a great and laudable, I don't think it's pragmatic, and I think it's abhorrently expensive at this point in time for Ontario. Right.
And so that did, was there did Don Ives and did others have their red lines that you sort of like, that you were forced then into the middle?
Yeah. You know what? A big debate, not forced into, we were all in agreement with where we ended up, and there was a lot of give and take. But one of, a rent registry was something that was really important for one of our Quebec members. And I thought, what's wrong with the rent registry? I think that's something a conservative could get behind. People understanding how much rent is paid in different places in order for them to be able to not be ripped off. How is that not a conservative kind of thing, So I was happy to join him in that. He thought it was a little bit outside the box. And for me, I said, no, I think it makes a lot of sense. So let's put it in there. One other item that was needed a lot of discussion was, what the hell is affordable housing and how do you define it?
Yeah.
You know this. I mean, I can see you're smiling because it is a quagmire. So what is, it's affordable housing, it's assisted housing, it's missing middle, there's all kinds of things. So how do you define it? So where we landed is an aspirational goal that you should not be spending more than 30% of your income on housing. That's how we defined where we want to get to in the future, as opposed to prescribing, we need this many units of affordable housing. Well, what's affordable, right? And who
Yeah.
Who gets it?
And it's interesting. There are different definitions now. The one that CMHC typically uses might be 20% below market, but then Toronto is looking at a different way of approaching things, having previously used that metric.
Yeah.
And so they're looking more at, the ability of someone to afford based on their income level. So there are different ways for sure to define it. I mean, at the end of the day, we also just need more housing, and so there's an affordable housing component to it for sure, and I think an underinvestment in community. Yeah, and so the
Can I add one more piece to that though? Too,
yeah, for sure. I
want to add one more piece to that, which is I think even an important consideration. We need to build the houses, but we can't do it the same way we've been doing it, because if we do it exactly that way, we're putting 100 megatons of GHG emissions into the air.
Yeah.
So that's the climate part. That's being cognizant of where you build, how you build it. And I believe strongly in those things as well, because the more you put into the air, the more it impacts our current industries and causes them to try to figure out ways to reduce beyond what they can reduce to already.
Right. And your opposition to make sure there's consistency here. So your opposition to banning sort of natural gas wasn't to say we shouldn't move off natural gas. It was to say, let's make sure that this is feasible and we can actually bring people on side to do the things we need to do. Yeah.
And you throw a flag on something like that, you're not going to get anywhere with the other really good 143 recommendations.
Yeah, well, it's good to have that political lens. I think that's sometimes my experience. I steal ideas all the time from people who are in academia writing different policy, proposing different policy ideas, but you do have to take it and then say, how am I going to make sure that people will see themselves in this, and that this isn't something that they're going to immediately dismiss out of hand? It can be a challenge sometimes, obviously, right? It's like it's a tough thing to bring people. I've experienced this with drug policy, in a significant way, because if you say the wrong thing or if you articulate it in a way that is, it enables people to seize it and turn it into something that it isn't. That's welcome to politics. So having that political lens to know, is it the right thing, wrong thing? That's the first question. And the second question is, can this get done?
Yeah. And I don't miss that analysis. I would expect from our podcast today, there'll be several things I said that will be reinterpreted as to what I meant, but it's still fair game, I suppose.
So you hope not. I see you as, so the last conservative I had on my podcast was Arnold Viersen. And he said
that went
things,
well, eh?
Yeah, you're my reclamation project here, so conservatives will go on my show again. I actually think I should have pumped your tires at the beginning of the conversation. So when I look at you, I think when you were leaving your post as labor minister, I'll just use it as an example. The Teamsters said nice things about you. Okay, the conservative labor minister and the Teamsters said nice things about you. They said open door policy, professional, courteous, good to deal with. Roger Kusner, obviously, is someone I think highly of, and obviously there's an East Coast connection there, so he probably likes you right from the get-go. But he's saying nice things about you as a liberal. I mean, you were able to, I think, work across the aisle. Testament to your post-political career that you're able to then work with Ann McClellan, you're working with Don Iveson, you're working across the aisle as well. But I do think that idea of putting politics aside to get things done is what I want out of politics as much as anything. I saw that in you. I don't see it in everyone. So I do think we have to be careful about, we live in a political environment. You have to be worried about, things getting seized and reinterpreted, as you put it. If you're good at it and if you're willing to work across the aisle and get things done, I think most people appreciate it.
I agree. And I will tell you, if I could give one piece of advice to any politicians who are out there listening, the reason why it's important to be seen to do that is because fundamentally, business does not understand politics. They don't get it. They don't understand it. And if you want to help them understand what's going on there to make sense, you have to come from a place that can hear both sides of a political divide and advise on what is being said on both sides of the political divide. So if your ears are shut and you won't listen to anybody else, you're useless to the business community.
Yeah. Yeah, that's see, I had not thought of it from that perspective. I always thought about it as a backbencher who always needed to build coalitions and to work across the aisle to get anything done inside my caucus, outside my caucus. I found, and I think it's also, I'm gravitated, there are people who are good at this, and I don't always have to agree with you to respect the work that you do. And so I was asked the other day by parliamentary interns, who would you work with across the aisle? And I would work with, if I was a staffer, I would love to work for Michelle Rempel. I would love to work for Charlie Angus because they speak their mind. They're good at it. And they're partisan. They're partisan as all hell sometimes, but they're also willing to drop it and get stuff done.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly it. The partisanship can put people off, but it is part of being part of the team.
Yes. Yeah, it's a necessary, it's also the world in which, welcome, you can't engage in politics but for partisan politics unless you're maybe at the municipal level. And even then, not everyone. So I asked if you missed it. I mean, we share something, not just an interest in pulling politics aside to get things done. We also are both failed leadership contestants. You probably learned a lot in the course of that. I certainly learned a lot last year. Do you think you will come back at some point?
Can I tell you the funniest story about that? So I have I recognize I have a higher profile now because I do a panel show on Monday for CBC. I do a panel show on Tuesday for CTV, and I speak at a lot of events. Do you know how many people come up to me and say, you should really run for leader? And I'm going, I did that in 2017, people. Where were you then? You would make a great leader. Shut up. I know. I've been there. So I welcome, I think in 10 years from now, maybe we'll tell you.
I wish you'd won. I wish you'd won. I was like, were you a member? Did you vote?
Did you buy a membership? Could have helped me out there. Like me now. So back to when I come back. I will be blunt and honest, and it's taken me a long, long, long time to get to this point of vulnerability, and I will tell it to you exactly the way it is. Because of my husband's extra care that is needed, in order for him to remain in a nursing facility, which is what he needs, to protect the staff, I have to pay for a private companion to be with him from the time he wakes up to the time he goes to sleep. And that is on top of what you pay through this normal system for care. I'm not complaining about this, Nate, at all. It is a fact of life. That's what happens for some people in young onset Alzheimer's. And it's keeping them healthy and it's keeping them happy. But it is exorbitantly expensive. And as a result, I have to continue to work in other venues where I can make sure that I can pay for that and I can pay for my kids' education. So in this point in time, I'm going to say no. I don't know what the future holds. I still love it. I still respect it. I think it's the best job you'll ever have. But I can't even think about it right now because can't afford it. Can't afford the time to put in to be a good constituent person. And then finally, again, I'm disclosing something because it happens to so many Alzheimer's family. Before a young onset Alzheimer person is diagnosed, they probably exist for several years with diminished capacity that is unknown to anybody, and they get into financial trouble. And my husband didn't pay taxes for 3 years. And he racked up significant credit card bills that he never paid. And families are left with digging out from that hole. So when I left politics, I knew I had to find a job, thank you CIBC, that was going to be able to help me dig out of the hole and as well look after the present and my kids for the future. And my financial advisor says it's going to take me 10 years. So there you go. That's my lot in life is kind of set. Maybe I'll be 66. I don't know. Maybe I'll be in Florida. Hey, look, I'm not living a life of a pauper at all. I've got a wonderful life, but there are realities, and I can't derail that plan I have right now that helps people around me.
You said two things there. I mean, one, I feel this way. I say this when people say, "Are you going to miss it?" I say it's the best job I'll ever have, and it truly is that.
100%.
The second thing, though, is when you're articulating the needs post-politics, people are like, what are you going to do next? I'm like, I have no idea. I would point to you as actually an interesting example of someone who has done the three things that I think are essential for what I want, which is you got to look after your family. And so that is about a paycheck to be able to look after your family appropriately. It's got to be meaningful
Yeah.
work. And you have found a way, I'm sure you like
Yeah.
the work through CIBC, but then you've also complemented that with other policy work as well, and sitting on boards and co-chairing these task forces, which have had an impact, by the way, like on housing in particular. The recommendations have been picked up in a serious way.
Yeah.
And then three,
Yes.
and you know, to the point of never say never. Politics is all time and opportunity. You never know, but you've got to put yourself in a position where if the door opens at a particular moment that makes sense, then you're able to come back. And that can never happen, but you don't want to go off and do something where you're completely out of it so you can never come back at all.
If I wanted to, I will tell you at CIBC, I've had the latitude of doing something else that I didn't anticipate, and I do Indigenous equity fundraising. Isn't that cool? So we've represented Indigenous communities, and we've represented companies in sales of assets and raising capital and helping them with negotiating loan guarantees. That keeps me going. I love that. We're at the beginning of something so cool in this country to see that kind of advancement and people being involved in these projects. And my experience in transport, labor, and natural resources just fit. I didn't do Indigenous work when I was in government or in opposition, but what I've learned there, I can apply. And of course, what you know is we all have this ingrained in us, this deep, deep respect for Indigenous communities and what they do, and we understand their pace. That's the important part.
Yeah, that is. So you're able to work on housing, you're able to work on climate, you're able to work on productivity and economic growth issues, and you're able to work on advancing economic reconciliation in a serious way.
Yes, 100%.
Interesting. Yeah, see, you're doing that's for me.
It's not easy. I got there, though. I mean, you just got to be prepared to take advantage of the circumstances as they change. It took 20 years for the Heisla to get to the point where they want to go out and raise $1.5 billion. I came in the last year.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And so when the Milton by-election happened, you were like, no, hard no. I'm not even thinking about it.
Oh, easy peasy. Yeah. Don't even let my name fester out there.
And do you think, though, so obviously Trudeau is not at the height of his popularity. And and yet Pierre Poilievre, I told this story before, but on the road last year, there were people who were like, I don't like your boss, but I don't know about this other guy. And you were in Parliament with him for a longer period of time. I've been on committee with him, though, and it's like he can't help himself. If I was advising him, I would just say, just be the guy next door. Just be a nice guy. Be positive about what you want to accomplish. Take your shots where you need to take them, but don't be vicious. Don't be nasty. People don't want that. People just want change. Be a positive force for change. He's the attack dog. He literally can't turn the dial down sometimes. When you think of the leadership of the Conservatives, I quite liked Aaron O'Toole. And I know you guys ran against each other for the leadership. I don't know what that relationship was like.
Yeah.
But I would put you guys in a similar progressive conservative camp of not my politics, but the way you approach politics. You're sharp, you're good at it, you're smart, and there's also you care about climate maybe in a different way. You care about reconciliation maybe in a different way. But you talk in a way that can build bridges across constituencies. There's a certain tear it all down approach to politics at the moment because just because of the anyone but Trudeau mentality in some quarters. But it's a frustrating time. Is it a frustrating time to be a more progressive-minded conservative, or it's just good to have change?
No, it's not. And one thing you get when you step out of the bubble is you get long-term perspective. And I can go back in time and I can look at various leaders who you would say exactly the same thing about, right? I really wish they wouldn't do this. I really wish they wouldn't do that. If they only did this, if they only did that. Proof is in the pudding, right? It's what is the electorate going to react to? I know that there's a school of thought out there is that politicians are pushing this kind of type of politics on the populace, but equally, is it the populace that is attracted to that kind of that kind of interaction. And therefore, that's why you see more politicians taking that point of view. Look, we've got no Trumps in Canada. There's no question about that. But can I see a partisan Liberal from your side? My God, there's nobody more partisan, quite frankly, than somebody whose name I completely forgot right now. I can see him in my mind. Oh my God. Oh, come on, Lisa. Dominic LeBlanc. Dominic LeBlanc. There's nobody more partisan than him. And if you get on his wrong side, he is sharp. Yeah. But he does portray, that more, premiers love him across the country. He gets along well with everybody, but he's partisan, right?
It's less partisanship, though, that I'm concerned about, because everyone takes their shots. Okay. It's more a sense of, like, take Moffat as an example, right? Who you work with, and you were, Dr. Mike Moffat. You got a situation where the leader of the Conservatives right now, even though he wants to build the homes, ostensibly, he diminishes Mike Moffat's standing by trying to cast him as a liberal academic, and big L liberal academic, which he's more green.
Failed. No, Mike will tell you it's a failed liberal academic.
Right. Which he's more of a success
or a liberal failed academic.
I'm like, isn't he a successful?
He's a friend of mine.
Successful Green Party academic? But regardless, he's like a nonpartisan academic who's doing his work, and whether you agree with him or not, that diminishing of expertise is the same thing. 300 economists sign the carbon pricing support as it's just diminishing. You can disagree on certain policies, and you might go like, my base is just not going to support that. So that's off the agenda because I've heard from people, and the experts can say this, but my voters don't want this, and they think it's making life more life less affordable. So we're going to pursue this instead. But there's a way of doing it that doesn't diminish intelligence and expertise, and really castigate people who are trying to contribute.
So in the case of Mike, one part I think that is relevant is he did work for PMO.
Right.
So he was a partisan. When you become a partisan, you become fair game.
You think? Like Stephen Gordon, though, who I think highly of, he could do, like, I think he did contract work with, and it's not that he's like a big C conservative. It's like I wouldn't dunk on Stephen just because he did some government related work. I don't know. It's tough.
Do we really want to go tit for tat on this stuff? But I mean, Gwynne Dyer, many years ago, former oil company guy, he got eviscerated. Certainly I get thrown at me all the time that I'm a failed liberal. Sorry, I'm not a failed liberal.
You are definitely a failed liberal.
No.
Conservative.
Yeah. That is the clip of the day. Lisa Raitt admits that she's a failed liberal. I'm a failed liberal. Fudge, I did it again. Failed conservative.
You swear.
No, I'm not swearing. Fudge. I don't swear. It's a different podcast that does the swearing, not me. Anyway, once you wear the partisan cloak, it is fair game. It is fair game, right? So let's think, can we give you an example of somebody who is not a partisan? Let's talk about something topical. Let's talk about what happened yesterday with CTV. And I say yesterday because we're taping today on Tuesday the 24th. Right.
You're good at this, by the way.
CTV put out... I know. CTV put out... I just wanted for clarence. CTV had a news clip that they have apologized for since, because they spliced together various parts of Apolyev's speech to make it seem as if he was criticizing and voting against nationalized dental care. And it wasn't that. It was a splice. Right. It was wrong. And CTV has apologized. But the leader of the opposition has now taken it upon himself to tweet out in anger, I would say, against the CEO of BCE. So CTV is a subsidiary of Bell Media, a subsidiary of BCE, and he goes after the CEO for what the CEO pays. Is that a step too far? That's going to be the argument today.
Well,
are corporate leaders fair game in this kind of thing? Like, he didn't hold the editing pen, no question about it. And CTV apologized, but it's still, You
okay with that? I'm perfectly okay with that. Because there's because there's a responsibility. It's probably attacked to, if I read the tweet, I'm probably going to be like shaking my head, be like, he just can't help himself. He's an attack dog. And just like get mean about it. But I think I'm in generally okay. So when consumers are screaming about affordability and Tony Staffieri is making $30 million, I think and we aren't building out the affordable networks as quickly as we maybe could. I think there ought to be great accountability for corporate Canada on some of that. Now, is the CEO responsible for, but he's, the buck stops somewhere. And if I want to shout at Bell, I'll shout at the CEO. Obviously, I'm more concerned just about the, and I think it's going to be to his detriment ultimately if he doesn't take a page out of your book and a page out of Hugh Siegel's book and a page out of Brian Mulrooney's book and a page, there's a constituency of people who want change, and and they're right now they're holding their nose and they're Toronto St. Paul's, they voted against the Liberal Party. They didn't vote for the Conservatives, and if they can quickly change their mind if they decide that the Conservatives are not their cup of tea and the leader isn't someone they're interested in. And people don't know Pierre, and his greatest enemy is probably himself, because if people get to know him and he's acting that way, then are people gonna like him? I'm not gonna like that. Is Atlantic Canada gonna like that? I'm not sure.
They're gonna vote for him. They're gonna vote for him. And because let's flip it on its other side. So you're asking me, I think, valid questions about whether or not the tone that the leader uses is something that's going to be attractive to people, and people don't necessarily really like him. And, should you do something, Lisa Raitt, about this?
No, not you. Should you do something? But I contrast it with your politics, because I think if you were the leader today, you guys would win in a crushing majority, and you might still win a crushing majority. But I think you and your approach to politics, if I find it appealing as a Liberal partisan, I think you've got a wide constituency there, and I think he's narrowing his constituency. Yeah, and you shouldn't do anything about it. You can't do anything about it. What are you going to do about it?
Okay. Agreed. And so let me flip it on its head. One of the pieces that has always bothered me about your leader, our prime minister, is the the demonization of individuals who don't agree with his philosophy. I don't like that. I am not a bad person because I don't agree with him on a policy issue. And that has been employed, I think, and that is probably why so many people are no longer enamored with him. Because at some point in time, you knew somebody that he called a bad person. Either on the COVID stuff, or on the freedom stuff, or on the environment stuff, or on the immigration stuff. He's definitely created this moral universe of, if you don't agree with me, you're a bad person. And that is the feeling that you're getting. If you want to understand why people don't like him, he's evoking an emotion in them of well, who the hell are you?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point insofar as whether any individual instance can be explained away or not. I think he was at his best early on when he was saying Conservatives are our neighbors, and that's the path. I think that's the path for your guy too. It's just and I think we're saying the same thing insofar as if the approach is to his book was called Common Ground for fudge's sake, I guess I'll say. But I just that approach to politics, I think, is just you're going to win more hearts and minds. And look, as Canadians, this idea that the country is broken and that we disagree on everything, and it's just wrong. We do agree on more than we disagree. Of course there are pain points, but if you can get together with a bunch of other people on housing and climate and productivity who have vastly different partisan views, and you can find common ground, a lot of us can.
And that's what Canadians want, by the way. Anne McClellan will tell you that. Absolutely. Whenever we do events, especially at universities, that's what people tell us, how much we appreciate the fact that we are partisans, yet we do work with one another on an issue that's important to Canadians. So that is something that we aspire to do. And when we do the work on the coalition or on the task force, honestly, we're trying to get around you guys in Parliament and go right to the electors and give them the information needed to ask you guys the tough questions at the door.
Right. And so what comes next for these vehicles? You've got the housing piece seems to have accomplished a good deal on housing. Maybe climate's the bigger thing next. I don't know. And then and there's a lot of adaptation work to be done, I think, on the climate file. There's a lot of common ground probably across party lines.
Yeah.
And then on the productivity front, it's an ongoing conversation, obviously, but you just keep updating the metrics every year, and
we will, and we'll continue to encourage governments to reduce. It's not reduce regulation or reduce bureaucracy, streamline.
I'm okay with cutting red tape, by the way.
know,
I'm okay with cutting red tape.
It's not red tape, though. It's just people take too much time to do little things in Ottawa.
Yeah.
That was always my biggest frustration.
It's a massive frustration. It's
too much.
I would contrast it. I almost you never thought to run for the leadership provincially, but I guess you backed Carolyn when she ran, which makes sense. Similar politics, but
yes, we are.
I don't know if this is a fair view of things, but the civil service in Ontario seems to take direction and run with it. And the civil service in Ottawa, this is not fair to a person, but in general, the civil service in Ottawa seems to say, yes, minister, but, yes, minister, but, yes, minister, but, yes, minister, but, and almost wait the clock out. And it like from the outside of both, in some ways, as a backbencher, they seem two different cultures.
Yeah. I would just say that I thought about this a lot, and I have to think that it's a level of risk difference. Right. In Ontario, you get more reward if you take a little bit more risk. In Ottawa, if you take more risk, you get Gomery.
Interesting. Yeah. So the incentives are
so
structured
I think
all
everyone
wrong.
just, and I also believe that I believe that some of the deputy ministers, associate deputy ministers, are some of the finest, I think, most intelligent leaders that we have in the country. Very, very smart, very, very capable, very savvy. I don't know if their skills translate into the private sector. I'm going to be honest with you. I mean, I think they can give good advice, but I don't see anyone transitioning to take over a company that reports to shareholders. Because I think that when we come out of that public milieu, we recognize that there are shareholders, but there are stakeholders. And there's a whole lot of other people to please. In a company, you please your shareholder. Yeah. It really is about that. And you try to do societal good. Yeah. That's part of it. But you usually have that off to the side, and it's something that you do. So I'm not dissing the bureaucracy by any means, but it is very large in Ottawa. It's unwieldy, and it's just got a terrible morale. And I don't know why, because if you talk to anybody on the outside looking in, you're wait a second, they get a DB pension. They can retire at 55 if you accumulate so many years of service. You get a healthcare plan after that. You're guaranteed certain increases along the way, and you're not digging a ditch necessarily.
Yeah, it's
that is good. There's going to be a tipping point, by the way, Nate. I predict there'll be a tipping point on how much Canadians are going to be comfortable with the levels of compensation that civil servants earn in the country.
I would guess that tipping point entirely hinges on if people think that they are getting value for their tax dollars on the services they receive. Because if they feel they're not getting value, and this is why, unfortunate, like I know digital IDs are like now weaponized with weird World Economic Forum nonsense, but I actually Ontario was going down a road for a while there that I thought made a lot of sense. Like I quite like the delivery of Ontario services and the amount I can do online, and
agreed.
There's a way of making sure that I feel treated with respect as a citizen, but as a engaging with the government. Whereas CRA is getting a little bit better. IRCC is still a disaster. The front facing services at the federal level leave a lot to be desired at times.
Yeah, I agree. And take a look at the United States, who just announced you can do online renewal of your passport in the United States. So we should be able to do that here. If you've been to a passport office recently, those 2 million new Canadians are all seeking passports, and the lines are incredibly long. So if you're going in for renewal because you need a new picture, it is you're there for a day if you're not there by 9 o'clock in the morning.
My last two questions. So I have a year left, or probably not a year left, maybe 6 months left. I don't know. So jug me, just looked up the supply deal. I don't, let me got left. But
Sorry.
but I got some time left. I got a full economic statement left probably, and then there's a platform to feed into.
You do.
So you from the outside looking in, if you're in my shoes and you've got one last window to make a difference as much as you can, what would be your advice to me to cause trouble and make a difference?
Identify what your local community absolutely needs, and be completely insistent with the minister that you need it before you go.
Yeah. Okay, and then
because I look at the art center and the velodrome that I built. Those things give me pride. You can work on policy all you want later on in life. Policy takes 17 years to set. You build something in your community, or you give, a donation to one of your things, whatever. I would focus on that.
It's true. I know, there's the Canada Workers Benefit. There's reform of animal welfare laws or drug policy laws. I can point to things that if I hadn't been there, they probably wouldn't have happened in the way that they happened. But when I walk by, there's it's almost completed now. The TASK, which is an umbrella group for urban Indigenous service providers in Toronto. The building's not located in my riding, but they're, Lindsay, the executive director, is in my riding. There's a large urban Indigenous community in my riding. Anyway, that's all to say, I worked with Patty to get $2 million to build a permanent home for TASK. So they own their site. They were like a hub for the urban Indigenous service organizations. I will walk by that 20 years from now and be like, that's a real thing that happened because, good advice. And the last thing, the advice on
you won't get a plaque for it, by the way. My name is on none of these buildings. Somebody else came in and bought the rights to the building. I'm going, come on, I'm the one that got this at a Flaherty, not that guy.
Unless you're in, where was I? I was like, I was in North Bay. And what's the cabinet minister provincially?
In North Bay?
Yeah, I'm blanking on his name right now.
Gravel?
No.
Michelle Gravel?
No.
Sorry, are you talking yours or
Fidelity.
Yeah.
So, but I'm going into, and it's the Fidelity building, and I was like, I got elected locally 8 years ago because I was like, my parents are teachers, and they, I was like, but the Fidelity's going to use a name everywhere because it was done. But regardless, it's like they got their name everywhere. So sometimes you can get your name on plaques. It takes a while though. It takes a while, Lisa. It takes a while.
I'm okay.
But my last question is really around on the way out. So there's going to be changeover this coming election. There are MPs who are off to do other things. I'm one of them, not running again. What would be your advice to someone like me or others who are departing from politics and then looking to make a difference in a different way? Because you lived both.
Yeah. What I found after I left politics, and it could have been just me, or it could be anybody, but there's a lot of welcoming people who are former politicians on the other side who will have a coffee with you to talk about what your next steps are. It's, I joke and say Frank McKenna is the godfather of every retiring former cabinet minister. You all go and he hands you this handwritten list that he put together 20 years ago and says, here are the things you need to consider as you embark upon your job search, quite frankly. I think you're going to do fine. I think what people have to understand and remember is that being an MP is not a passport to a dream job, and that you have to convince people that you have skills that are going to be applicable, and you got to hustle to get it. It just doesn't fall into your lap. I mean, you got to hustle and you got to show. Some people are lucky, some people are not. And then when you get in, it's hard work to adapt because you don't have staff ever.
And you
again.
don't want to go back to law because that's why that's one option as far as it goes.
Well, interesting. To practice, no. Although I still pay my Law Society dues.
I do,
still
yeah.
pay?
It's like a
I do. It's like my
tax every
fail-safe.
year, and I'm like, I do it again.
Yeah, but it comes off our income taxes, so it's okay. So no complaints. But I did think about it. Look, the bank was nothing I expected. I had thought I was going to do something like Ann did, go to a top tier law firm, become an advisor, maybe get a few boards. But when I came out, we were not in government. It was not it was not a comfortable place for the disenfranchised conservative. Now, hey, let's ask Lisa Raitt what she thinks, because possibly there's going to be an election and maybe a conservative government. Yeah. So it comes in cycles. So reach out, have coffees with people. I mean, Martha Hall Finley's done really well out there as well. Rana's done really well out there.
There are lots of different paths and lots of different things to do, for sure.
Places.
I mean, just
Peter Van Loan went back to practice municipal law.
He's at my old firm. I was a student at Aaron Burles. Yeah.
So he does that. So you can go back in and, put the harness of work back on. You can be an advisor. You can, as of October 19, I can lobby. Woohoo!
Well, I might just go be a farmer. We'll see. Not a bad thing. Not a bad thing.
We need that. Although I don't think you have the acreage in the beach that you need.
No, but in Kamlaki, Ontario, there's 180 acres. And my father-in-law passed to my wife and brother-in-law.
Oh.
Yeah. It's been in the family since 1834. I love being there. So I know with the kids.
Please
with the kids, not so much, but
keep it farm.
The kids love it, but it's like, it's like picking up your life and moving there. It's 2.5 hours, 3 hours away, so it's a hard thing. But yeah. So who knows? But
well, if you get goats, invite me, because I love goats.
We are going to get goats, and I will invite you. Yeah. The next time we chat,
goats and pajamas.
The next time we chat, it'll be goats on the farm. That sounds good. Well, I appreciate the time, and I look forward to seeing all that comes next. And do you want to give a plug for? You're wearing the shirt. You're wearing a shirt.
Okay, so let me tell you, it's Alzheimer's month here in Canada. It was, it was 2016 that I stood in the House of Commons, where I was asked to give the, how you do the SO31s or 32s? What are they?
31,
SO31s?
yeah, 31.
Okay, I never got that right.
You're a minister right away. That's the problem,
I know. No, it's a committee. So I was asked to do the SO31 for Alzheimer's awareness. Nobody knew my husband had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I got up and I started it, and I started to cry in the middle of it. And Don Martin gave me a call and he said, Raitt, what is going on with you? Why are you crying about it? And that's when it all came out. So anyway, this is my husband, Bruce, who is flexing, and there's a heart in it. My son, who's now 20, 3 years ago when he was 17 years old, decided he needed to do something. He designed this graphic. He has an inventory of sweatshirts. I'll show you the back. It says Alzheimer's Strong.
Oh, that's great.
And he sells these online. And as he's at Laurier University now, he raises awareness about what it's like to be a kid whose stepfather has young onset Alzheimer's. And my son, JC, does exactly the same thing. He's 23 years old, and he does some speaking engagements with me, because they're the lost kids. Nobody knows about them, and no one knows how to help them through what's going on, because it's kind of crazy, to be honest. But anyway, they're available. We also got a lot of extra smalls for grandchildren.
That's amazing.
So alzheimersstrong.ca if you want to go and check out Billy's inventory.
Good plug, and we'll play the clip so people can see it. And
okay. When I start to cry,
yeah,
fantastic.
We'll leave with that. Lots of laughing, lots of almost swearing, and a little bit of crying at the end. That's perfect. I really appreciate you joining me.
It was always a pleasure, Nick. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me on this episode of Uncommons. Thanks especially to Lisa for her time. She is really doing the three things that I hope to do post-politics, checking those three boxes, finding meaningful, interesting work, looking after her family, the most important thing. And she says she's not returning to politics, but also never say never. If she does ever return to politics, and she could return to politics, people from the Conservative Party would, of course, welcome that return. But I think because of her work, people like me across the aisle would welcome that return as well. Now, next up in our podcast, we have none other than Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Look out for that episode next week. We have, following that, Mark Carney joining us. We have a conversation around temporary foreign workers with Professor Scooterud from Waterloo, and we're working to schedule Christia Freeland as well. As always, if you like what we're doing, stop what you're doing right now. Leave us a positive review on your platform of choice. You can always reach me at info@bey8.ca or on social @bey8. And otherwise, until next time.